In this video, we're going to take a look at Sony's f1.8 50mm lens. Now, this is a prime lens, 50mm, covers full frame. It is autofocus. Pretty basic lens, you know, it's a plastic body construction. There are no stops on the focus mechanism, so it's a fly-by-wire affair, and no aperture stops, of course. But the important question is, what does this look like? Let's take a look. Let's look at bokeh first, and as we go from far to near, we do see that our out-of-focus lights in the background, they do have some edges. They do a little bit of stop signing, and the sides, they definitely have an ovalization, some of the chroma effect. And as we stop down to an f4, we definitely see some very distinct stop signing, although on the edge of frame, we do see that the bokeh in the background has become much more even in shape. And at an f8, we get more of the same. The bokeh, of course, is smaller. It is, you know, hard-edged, and even in size, though, from center of the frame. And we can also see the flare we get on the close lights. Now, to look at ghosting flare, we could see, you know, some nice round orbs. Not too many. It's pretty well controlled, even when looking down the barrel of this lens. And when we stop down to an f4, we start to get some odd-shaped flares as we move the light around. And at an f8, you know, we do get this very kind of odd street flare that goes in and out. Otherwise, it's pretty well controlled besides that. With our veiling flare test wide open, we can see that this inexpensive Sony lens has excellent flare control on this test. And as we stop down, we continue to see some very good control. That continues as we close down the lens even further. So very good control with the Sony. We're outside now to take a first look at breathing, and again I'm looking at the space in the sky above the roof line and also the windows on the lower left side to see how much they go in and out. You know, how much of a change in magnification do we get when we go back and forth, and the squares of course show the breathing again. You know, we're moving about 2 squares in or so as we focus in. Staying with this chart, we'll look at distortion, and we can see that this lens is actually, it's very flat, very little distortion. Now we'll look at some chromatic aberration, which of course mostly affects the lens when it's wide open, near wide open. And here we can pretty easily see some color fringing along the high contrast areas. And when we stop down to a 2.8, a little bit of fringing going on, a little bit of green there, a little bit of magenta, but it does much better as we would expect. Now, to check sharpness, I don't really have a good chart to check corner sharpness of the lens, but this piece of insulation is actually not bad. And as we punch in at the center, we could see what this lens resolves. And let's go all the way to the right. We do lose some sharpness, of course, at the edge of frame, all the way to the left. Very similar performance. Now let's punch out again, and let's go to one of the corners. We'll go to bottom right. Again, a very similar drop-off to the middle of the frame at the edge, and we'll go to top left, and again, very similar performance. So we do, of course, lose a little bit on the edges compared to the center, but overall, you know, for a $200 lens, this really is not bad. Now, when we go to a 2.8, let's you know, close it down to a 2.8, and let's take a look at the center. And let's see how the edges do, and then we'll take a look at the corners again. So again, it doesn't drop, you know, it does pick up a little bit as we stop down the lens. Again, it's performance that we would expect. A slight pickup in sharpness at the edge of frame. Now we'll go to the corner, bottom right, you know, not bad. And let's go to top left. And again, not too bad at a f2.8. And that's the Sony lens with sharpness. Now to wrap things up with Sony's FE series 50mm 1.8 prime, I would have to say for video, this lens was surprising. It was surprisingly good in terms of the optical performance. Now, as you saw from the test, this lens has very little to no distortion. There's, really no perceived barrel distortion. The focus field was very flat, meaning the corners and the edge of frame, they were pretty close to the center of the frame, when I did my quick test on that. And I would have to say with autofocus performance, I didn't really show it in this test, but I did test that earlier. And the autofocus performance was actually fine. Now, it's a little noisy for video, but in most situations, most audio recording situations where, the boom pole is above the subject and not on the camera, the autofocus noise, the motors, it'll be perfectly fine. At least, that's my experience. Now, in terms of speed, this definitely is not as fast as a G Master lens, at least from what I tested earlier. But what I have to say for video, you very rarely have like a snap focus pull. It's always like, a nice ramp up to the pull and a nice slow down, when you get to your subject. So in terms of autofocus speed, again, for video, I think it's perfectly fine. Characteristics, it's, a very contemporary lens. That's how I would describe the characteristics. That's not saying it's good or bad. It's just contemporary. It's not going to have a vintage feel, but it's not a vintage lens. And then again, for $200, I think this is a great buy and a very good lens. So that's going to wrap it up for Sony's FE 1.8 50mm. Thanks a lot. We'll see you in the next one.